Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the 22nd module in the series Marketing Management, a Vuca perspective. We are discussing fundamentals and I am your friend and your tour guide, Siddhiprad Bhattacharya. In the words of Sir Mervyn King, one of England's greatest economists and management thinkers, he says global market forces will sort out those companies that do not have sound corporate governance. Corporate governance, in this sense, means how organizations manage to deal with the affairs of their organization vis-a-vis what market forces surround them. They have to always be on the lookout for what is changing, what is new, what is innovating, how markets are getting disrupted, and what their roles are to make the lives of their consumers, their stakeholders, better all the while. So this is typically how market forces impact you as an organization, and you must be ready for the same. Today's conversation is about understanding market forces effects, and for any thinking organization, you have to always be, like we spoke of, checking on the impact of various factors and variables that come your way. You have to be armed. We've discussed research in fair amount of detail. Now, armed with those research capabilities, marketers can now look at inspecting how market forces are affecting their marketing efforts, and you have to start beginning to factor them in your entire marketing scenario. The focus of our entire understanding of marketing management is with the lensing of Vuca, and hence we are bringing back Vuca into the space now to realign it with whatever we have learned so far and understand how the perspective of Vuca actually gives it a different kind of lensing, a better kind of understanding, and it's sort of a recap on all things that matter from the Vuca lensing and how they apply to the newly learned research capabilities that we now have on hand. So we'll quickly recap what Vuca factors we've already known of and how they apply to this scenario. So again, Vuca is the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment which profoundly impacts market forces. It shapes global economies and it also shapes the destinies of industries. Financial downturns are one way Vuca forces act on you. Recessions are part of those financial downturns which disrupt your economic stability. You have geopolitical upheavals always disrupting ways policies are defined, your supply chain and your various other purchase tariffs, etc., which affect the smooth running of businesses, and they always reconfigure trade, and so therefore you're constantly seeking newer options, newer alliances. Again, pandemics, we've recently faced COVID-19, these expose certain vulnerabilities and they alter consumer behavior very, very drastically, and also the supply chains that provide the necessary raw material or ship the finished products off to ready markets. Resources get depleted and energy needs rise, and these pressure businesses to constantly and sustainably innovate. You always have to keep one step ahead of whatever is coming your way. Rapid technological shifts also affect our world today, and they create both opportunities as well as the challenges which we must override. And we have to start thinking in disruptive ways. We have to start applying creative and lateral thinking and disrupt whatever is the current market so that we create a space where consumers look at us with a positive light in their minds. And that is how we stay ahead of competition as well. Socio-cultural changes also occur and they influence the kind of demand there is. So whether the industry stays a red ocean or moves into a blue ocean scenario or vice versa is something which is also defined by how people react to the current demands and the current needs of that particular offering set. And this also affects how people who come to work for that organization or for that industry are affected. So, workforce dynamics also change. And lastly, but not least, environmental and climatic concerns also drive regulatory policies. Nations build policies. Nowadays, we are looking to go towards a carbon neutral scenario. So, therefore, policies are in place to help us reach that particular end goal over a specified amount of time. These drive regulatory policies and they also drive how corporates align their strategies accordingly. This is a very, very complex ecosystem and businesses must adapt, which is the key idea to evolving risks and opportunities so that you reduce the risk and you increase your capability to build strengths out of your opportunities. And what you do is balance your short term survival with long term growth. So it has to be a duality of existence where you instantly gain some short term gains and you also ensure that in the long term you are viable and you're seen as a force to reckon with. This interplay of these factors is essential for navigating the ever changing market terrain and sustaining organizational resilience. We have seen a number of instances in the very recent past which have shaken the way businesses are working, commodities are trading hands, and so therefore it stays forever in the minds of business people and marketers especially to think this process through because we as marketers are supposed to lead the change. We are supposed to be the thinking part of the organization. So we must catch hold of trends and help percolate these throughout the organization so that the effect is immediate and across the entire corporation. Moving further, this VUCA diciness is something which all organizations and their marketing teams therefore must deal with, and we need to understand how the scenario plays out. Now, VUCA in terms of the modern strategic landscape originates from military and political sciences. All major developments of the last century and the current one have come majorly from conflict. Conflict, unfortunately, is also the progenitor of innovation as well because you need to survive, you need to win over a certain adversarial situation. So, VUCA encapsulates the challenges of the modern world, like we discussed, with understanding of the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity which exist in this particular terrain. It came from the US Army, transitioned from Cold War stability to addressing multilateral unpredictable conflicts requiring an adaptable set of strategies. So, this constant churn of strategies, constant analysis and application of ideas, thoughts, and scenarios is a sort of constant war game exercise. And this is typically what corporate strategy must also follow because the world of business is also following these particular instances and events in our timeline. A variety of external factors are there, and organizations today can come under the upheaval created by these and various different scenarios that are there. So, there are financial downturns and recessions, there are geopolitical upheavals, pandemics, depletion of resources, energy needs, technological shifts, disruptive market shifts, socio-cultural impact, and last but not the least, environmental and climatic considerations which we have very, very shortly discussed. And in a general sense, this is how the VUCA universe looks like. At the core of it is complexity. Now, inside of complexity, how do we understand that something is complex? It is defined as a situation with many interconnected parts and variables. So, no one part alone is very, very visible or foremost. And how do you manage to tackle this? You restructure your organization, you bring in or develop internally specialists and you build up resources adequate to address the complexity. For example, if you are doing business in many countries and each have unique regulatory environments, tariffs, and cultural values, and you provide several products to several customer segments, then what you need to do is you need to have individual experts addressing local considerations. Now, when things are susceptible to change at a moment's notice, that is a volatile situation. So, volatility comes in next. Here, the characteristics are the challenge is unexpected because it's sudden, and it is unstable because you don't know which way it will turn, and it may be of unknown duration, so you don't know how long it will last, but it is necessarily hard to understand. And why hard to understand? Because you don't know, because of the variety of variables going up and down in the entire scenario, and so therefore you can't always have complete knowledge about it, and that is why you have to act on it given whatever facts you have on the matter. So, you have to build in slack and devote resources to preparedness. For instance, you may have to at times stockpile your inventory, or at times look at overbuying talent, so that when a particular calamity strikes you, you are prepared with enough men and resources to handle that particular scenario. These steps are typically expensive because they come at a certain cost and premium. There should be a certain kind of balance between expenses and risks, and price fluctuations are an example where natural disasters may take a certain supplier offline. So, what you need to do is you need to have inventory in place, you need to have liaisons with other suppliers to fill in for the gap which is caused by the natural calamity, for example. Now, why these costs are important to understand? Because there is warehousing at one end, because that will keep your inventory but will come at a cost, and the other part is probably benching costs, when you've taken talent on but aren't fully utilizing them. So, you are keeping certain people on a retainer so that when the need comes, you are able to deploy them very quickly and efficiently. Alongside all of these things, the other part that can come to your aid here is learning development and upskilling, because these keep your entire workforce aligned and up to scale and up to scratch. So, when the time for deployment comes in, you can send them in without having to think that they will actually go and flounder. Ambiguity is something where causal relationships are completely unclear, because you don't know what is causing the actual effect or the symptom that you see, and you may not at times have precedents of the same existing. So, you have to face unknown unknowns, which means you don't know what it is, you don't know where it came from, and you have no pre-knowledge to tackle it. So, these scenarios create ambiguity. You are not fully prepared to answer that particular scenario, and here you will have to experiment. What you will have to do is, if you don't know the exact answer, you will have to first and foremost create what research tells us to do: hypothesis. You create a hypothesis, you test it out, and then once a response from that particular test comes out, you check veracity of that same, whether it is working in your favor, and if it is, then further can it be fine tuned or calibrated, so that you can make it even better as you go along. And finally, all of these things lead to uncertainty, where despite a lack of other information, the event's basic cause and effects probably get known, but change is possible, and so this is not a given. That means when you invest in information, you collect, interpret, and share it, you can work best in conjunction with structural changes, such as adding information analysis networks that can reduce your ongoing uncertainty. Here, technology comes to our aid. You can add AI, ML as layers. AI is obviously artificial intelligence, ML is machine learning, and what you can do is you can do scenario mapping here and situational gamification. So you actually play certain scenarios out in a simulated way so that you are able to understand if you walk down a certain path, what are the possible outcomes of that certain path. And when you have a possible answer, your uncertainty and what it gives in effect is the risk is what you reduce by trying to understand how the scenario plays out and what possible answers stand at the end of that particular path. Now, the entire VUCA subject as such has complexity as its core matter, and so therefore, as business thinkers, as marketers, we must completely understand complexity and what it sort of pushes out at us, and through that we are far more able and adept to answer the challenges that come from the VUCA environment. So let's understand complexity in its maximum wholeness. Now, complexity here is defined by the number of system elements, their relationships, and the dynamics which they have. Complex structure gives a high interconnection or non-linear relationships. Complex behavior means when there is emergence of certain new systems, you see the outcomes surpass individual contributions. Volatility where outputs from complex systems are unpredictable, so you don't know where the answers will come and in what particular ratio, and often these become operations at the edge of chaos literally, because there is no clear ratified defined answer or expectation, so it could go any which way. Then there is uncertainty where the inability to assign probabilities to outcomes sort of becomes an impediment for you, and this is again compounded by the dynamism in the environment that you are facing. There are certain variables which are suddenly likely to change, and so you can't exactly predict that this will be the outcome. We discussed in research the independent and the dependent variables in any experimentative scenario. Here you see that the dependent variables are undefined. So you can't always know which particular cause has had which particular effect. That leads to the ambiguity where multiple valid solutions may exist at the same point in time, and that automatically challenges the decision maker because you don't know which evil to choose or which blessing to choose for that matter. So when are complexities are part of the management decision process, how do you manage taking those particular decisions because you are faced with two very odd choices? So your traditional linear models will fail in these chaotic systems. So instead of that, what you have to rely on is intuitive versus reflective thinking. There is Kahneman's system, which is fast, intuitive. So you quickly take your steps, and with your intuition, you try and understand what you would have done in a certain scenario. If you fail with the answer of that scenario, drop it quickly and move to a second scenario playing out. And then there is system 2, which is deliberate and logical. And this highlights the bias in decisions because the moment you put in your certain logic, that comes from whatever you have understood, and this is based on data. Whereas when you take intuitive, you have precognitive bias, and so it depends on individual skill. Both these things are working at odds. So you will have to ensure that you take the fast and intuitive method, but you should also be ready to drop that particular path and move on to a secondary path. So this requires you to think in quick and multiple test scenarios. If you remember, we had talked about A/B testing. So this is A/B testing on steroids. And you'll have to be very quick about it. Your team will have to also learn to take quick decisions about keeping on with a certain path of progress or dropping it and trying something fresh. The implications for management in this case are organizations in today's day and age must embrace this ambiguity, and they have to balance the chaos and order. You have to try things out constantly, and if they work, you have to document these, you have to pass the information along, maybe seek feedback, and once you get a semblance of certain order within that chaos, then you start moving it into more deliberate and logical actions. Before that, you should be open to trying. And the other part is that rational models, which are the logical ones, they need to integrate the behavioral insights. So that is why you have to understand, you have to get some data. The data comes from all the experiments that you do. And therefore, the faster you're able to do, the more capable in terms of the team's skills and the ability and the mindset, that will give you more adaptive strategies as an organization. So what are the theoretical approaches to complexity? You can look at a variety of studies which have happened across the board, and it gives you a fairly deep understanding of system science and complex systems theory. There is autopoiesis, which is self-reproducing and self-maintaining systems. This is the body's immune system. When it fights a virus, the body's immune system looks up its own genetic database and tries and understand which particular virus in its previous records had been fought and successfully defeated by using a certain mix of proteins, amino acids, and various other chemical compounds. It tries to replicate it. If it works, it records it as a win. Else, it tries another combination until it succeeds. And meanwhile, it puts in certain other steps which tries and keeps that virus at bay. There are various statistical contributions from Maturana and Varela, 1972, and you get also contributions from Ludwig von Bertalanffy, Gregory Bateson, and Margaret Mead in this particular scenario, and you can understand autopoiesis from them even better. And as we bring in AI in a more definitive way, as our systems move more towards integration of man and machine, it automatically leads to scenarios where people and their skill sets are integrated with machine requirements and their ability to assess things, and hence cybernetics and social systems theory comes into play. The focus here is effective organization and control. Data inputs may come from systems which are running the roost. For example, if you've got security manning in a city, the camera feeds may pick up the actual raw data. There may be algorithms which are looking at managing threats and certain flags which are raised. There is a machine learning layer which raises those flags to a certain level of importance. And then finally, it comes to the human layer which takes that decision on how to go about certain critical ones. Most often than not, the AI takes care of the regular fare, but typical difficult ones are the ones which come for human intervention. You can look at Macy's conferences from 1940 to 1961, which developed this entire concept to what it started off in the sense of AI going further. Notable ideas here are Stafford Beer's viable system model, which is good for further reading, and Luhmann's social system theory, where organizations are seen as communication systems. Why communication? Because both within the setting of the organization as well as externally, you have to have communication systems ready. So you're interacting with your environment and you're interacting with your team both at the same point in time. You're taking inputs from teams which are attempting the agile systems which you had discussed in the previous conversation, and you are implementing those and checking their success and veracity. If they succeed, how are you calibrating them and getting better and more in-depth answers, maybe better results, maybe faster results out of them, while your outer environment gives you certain stimuli which helps you understand how well you're doing vis-a-vis other players in that particular space as well. So you're mapping yourself to competition, you're mapping yourself to the consumer requirements, etc., all at the same time and making your system viable. It's a constant process of checking how and where you have reached. And then there is second order cybernetics to reintegrate humans as part of systems, which is what we discussed. And that is the next stage of evolution, which is in a way coming in a very, very fast pace. We are looking at certain introductions of wearables today, which may go into implants tomorrow and further integrate cybernetics into the human experience altogether. Now, understanding the relation between complexity and chaos theory is something which is important. Ilya Prigogine has talked about self-organization, dissipative structures, which means that you have to have the ability as an organization to assemble people, the right kind of skill sets, the right kind of numbers, and the right kind of places so that they can manage the affairs when calamity strikes. And dissipative structures because they can be broken down into teams. The teams can manage affairs or sub projects at the local level, and when there is no need of them, they can go about and do what they were doing on a regular basis. Then there are synergetics and emergence, which Herman Haken has talked about. Synergetics is about creating a certain amount of shared information pools and emergence of threats, so that with the shared emergence of knowledge, you can tackle similar problems actually happening across a variety of fronts, maybe geographically, maybe in terms of system-based threats which attack our computer systems today and various other opportunities like that. And then you also have to have swarm behavior and non-linear dynamics. This takes a lot from zoology, where the study of bees in particular helps us define how swarms work, and this works very well when we talk about supply chains, where you have a central command and drones which play out to that particular role of the central command's instructions. You've got various mathematical tools which you can look at. So there is chaos theory, fractal geometry, we can help showcase how from a single source your outward paths can be actually measured and which particular progression is something that your organization should take in order to succeed. Now, these are things which are an introduction currently, but can be discussed in greater detail to understand how these fit back in the entire VUCA context. Again, networking is very important because nodes of information working in tandem together help push the entire organization in a specific cohesive direction. Here you use structures of interconnected elements, for example, social networks, because consumers also interact over social networks. Here you can look at various published authors like Mark Granovetter, who's talked about weak ties, and Duncan Watts, who's talked about small world networks, each of which capture how interactions affect the entire larger network's thought process and general disposition. Again, there is significant work done by Albert Laszlo Barabasi's scale-free networks, which may also be looked at to understand how you can take one microcosm of a cause and effect relationship and then multiply it across a larger network to see cascading effects on the general population. The applications of these are, while you use a structure of complex systems, you understand how network dynamics affect knowledge nodes and where your interventions must lie. At which particular point in the entire value chain will you create a particular change so that the ripple effect falls across each and finally ends the outcome. So it has a role in the causal relationship between points A and point B. You change point A's variables and you see an outcome change in point B. This could be in product thinking, this could be in design thinking, where if you change the texture, the packaging, what kind of effects does it have on the consumer psyche as well. So you can use all of these interrelated connections and understand what one particular change will have a cascading effect upon in the larger network. Then there are insights in human and machine sciences where a lot of today's movements work. For example, robotics, data science, and computational modeling with algorithms. Here you have got certain tools to address complexity. You've got pattern recognition, big data analysis, visualization. These are tools which come in handy for marketers. Pattern recognition helps you create trends and help in better forecasting. Big data analysis can actually help point out which independent variable can be linked to experimental change, and visualization helps you understand this at a dashboard level. Here, multi-agent modeling helps you understand how many independent variables you can at a time simultaneously look out for, and machine learning takes the heavy lifting aspect of this and checks and creates scenarios and simulations for you, and it creates those interactions in complex systems and gives you those possible ways down the line which predicts which way a particular campaign can roll. Again, human interactions use neuroscience and behavioral sciences mixed into each other so that insights from how brain functions, responses, etc., what effects of behavior and therefore what triggers in actions can be looked at. And the contributions to understanding complex systems is how environment perception actually shifts behavioral patterns. If it's a dark room, how do people react to certain products? If it's a light and brightly lit room, whether it's a closed space or an open space, where will people react more favorably towards your product and service? Where will people feel closer to you as a brand and where people will want to make the distance? So studies in these particular areas can help you define a uniform experience also. This helps you define the kind of user experience that you want to drive and make it synonymous with your brand. Again, collaborative efficiency and organizational behavior help you understand which way the entire thing will go. What helps the human aspects to come forth here? First and foremost, obviously, psychology and sociology. These are perspectives on human behavior and decision making, which form a very, very crucial part of this entire communication piece. And here, what you can do is You can understand the emerging trends from your basis in psychology and sociology, and you can create scenarios and simulations here to play out how certain shifts will actually, being independent variables, create a different outcome for any marketing or any particular business campaigns. This is captured very well in social physics, which talks about big data based analytics of social systems, and it's been published by Pentland in 2014. You can pick up inputs from there as well and get into the details of this. Then there are cross disciplinary insights also. Why? Because the human brain's predictability of actions or reactions for that matter is not a simple outcome of just logic. There are various other things that are emotive in nature and affect human thinking and decision making. So you can take inputs from arts, philosophy, unconventional disciplines, and you can look at various kinds of intelligences which people display also. Here you can take help from all these things to express yourself in new forms. And this could be taking on, let's say, a good example of this is Nike Plus. Nike Plus is a particular partnership between Nike and Apple. The process was to add music to the beat of which you could take your morning run. And running was the activity which Nike was helping, music was the activity which Apple was helping. When you mixed both of these together, running was a physical training based where you watched your weight, you saw your shape, and it could be defined in your physicality. And the music was the undefined, the art part of it, which made you feel more at home whilst you ran that particular distance. So it was a mix of the left and right brain inputs which gave the runner a better user experience. So these are new forms of expression which take a nice blend of both the logical as well as the creative aspects. It encourages innovative approaches. This definitely was very innovative, and it helps people understand and manage complexity that much better. So once you are able to run a program which helps your consumers get a better experience out of as simple a thing as their morning jog, you are going to entrench yourself as a brand forever in their habits, in their way of life. So there are a variety of applied areas where the understanding of VUCA and complexity in particular come to the aid of today's marketers. So when you have got complex problems, you need new frameworks to attack those particular complex problems. Like H.L. Mencken has said, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Why? Because we tend at times to think that you simplify things and you get the answer. But that necessarily may not be true. Because if you try and oversimplify things, what will happen is you actually stop looking at a variety of other complex independent variables which may be affecting the scenario. Hence, addressing complexity requires innovative approaches exemplified by the VUCA model. And you have to have 5 strategic thinking competencies, which is what we are trying to expound on, and we are trying to help people build it in today's marketing thinking age. So, first and foremost is critical thinking, which means you are able to analyze the priorities amongst a large number of variables and decide which one takes precedence and then go about solving it in a very, very logical fashion. The second part is creative thinking. Now, creativity is looking for extraordinary solutions. Why would you need extraordinary solutions? Because you will have unconventional problems, things that you don't have pretexts or precedents for. Then systems thinking. Once you have decided that a certain path can help you achieve it, you formalize that particular path for success and calibrate for improvement even within that till you reach a certain threshold, which is like the marginal utility for it. Then you have to think in time, which means you have to be proactive and perceptive so that you spot opportunities and threats well before they actually arrive at your doorstep. And ethical thinking, importantly, not the least. Why? Because this pays off in the longer run. Ethicality, people think, is something which just defines the morality of an organization, but there is also a cost involved with the ethicality. If you are not ethical, what typically happens is you end up burning and expending more energy trying to cover up the reasons why you have not been ethical, and because of which you add to the risk in one hand, because you don't know whether by not being ethical you have opened a completely new Pandora's box, and on the second hand, at some point in time the truth will out. When it does, the overall goodwill that you may have otherwise created may come to a particular standstill or go in the negative, and that affects your ability towards achieving success in the longer run very, very drastically. So the bigger time that you've spent being non-ethical at the outset, but you maybe kept a very brave face in the meanwhile, when the truth will out at a much later date, for the time that you have not been ethical, people will hold you for that particular time, and the amount of uh, flack that will come at your side, it will be tremendous, and you probably won't be able to manage it that point in time because the problem would have compounded by then. So, which is why ethical thinking is something which organizations, even more than the moral high ground, is something which is simply good sense. It's good sense for business, it's good sense for survival, because then you are not expending raw energy trying to cover up your tracks, but actually focusing on things that are more important. Critical thinking and ethical thinking both go hand in glove. So, when you are critical in your understanding of certain things, you take away the non-necessary, and ethical thinking, if you do not implement it, adds more pressure onto the system. So, you need to take it out of the consideration, keep it simple, keep it forward looking, keep it forthright, so that you can focus on the real problems, the bigger issues, and keep solving them with your creative abilities. So, when you're putting frameworks for dealing with complexity, you have to start thinking of integrated and differentiated system views. Why? In the internal structure, what you need to do is you develop mental models to understand system dynamics, how one thing leads to the next. You need to build in communication. So, you will do that through the feedback loops and interactions both within your team as well as from external input sources. And then you have what Peter Senge talks about as the fifth discipline, which is systems thinking in organization. And you can build the entire success story and create something which is repeatable, reproducible, and scalable. Why repeatable? Because you can do the same process over and over, and with methodical success, you will be able to demonstrate that you have the ability to control a certain scenario. Reproducible means it's not just within that particular scenario, but going with the logical tenets, you can apply the same tenets elsewhere and create a certain marginal amount of success there, if not more. And then scalable, because you can take a small example and then you can build it up at scale, and each scenario will play out exactly the way the smaller pilot scenario has played out. So, this is something which we can actually build in terms of systems thinking. Now, when it comes to external observation, you have systems which observe systems as black boxes. You don't know what is happening inside, how it is making all these things happen almost as if by magic. So, you identify emergent properties and patterns. For example, if you're talking about weather forecasting, you're constantly keeping your eye on hot and cold air currents and water currents. When you're looking at how they're interacting amongst themselves, you're also looking at what particular emergent features it can create and what their properties will be, which particular direction they will take. Till the point of time of manifestation, you can create scenarios. And when you create scenarios, you can use the AI ML layer to actually showcase how simulated scenarios will play out. When you are experimenting, we've already talked about experimentation will always give you a high probability. It will never tell you things in absolutes. So you will have to look at it from increasing the probability every single time you're measuring. And that is the way scientifically managers need to approach their problems with a higher level of confidence in what they're trying to achieve. And it combines both these perspectives and enhances the kind of insights that you get out of your research process. There's a Sinefin framework developed by Snowden and Boone in 2007, and they categorize context into simple, where you can solve a problem, establish what the best practices are, and so then you also put in certain markers. You sense what the problem is, you categorize the problem, and then you respond to it. These are for typical day-to-day activities which are measured, which have a finite output, and you know how to get to the success parts of these. Then there are certain complicated processes. These may also have been resolved, and you can create good practices around these. So you can create the sense, analyze how much of investment in terms of time, in terms of personnel, in terms of other resources you want to put in, and then you respond to it. Then there are complex problems where you have to have emergent practices. These may not always have the answer clearly put out in front. So you have to probe, you have to experiment, you have to try things out. The agile system starts to work here, and then you sense whether you are going in the right direction, then move it into the complicated, or if you've been able to build it down into sub processes, then you move it into the simple sub processes. Each process adds up to the larger complex problems solution by adding all the individual cogs in the wheel, and you therefore respond. And then there is total chaos. So in a chaotic system, you will have to have novel practices, which is where we discussed the creative thinking abilities coming into play. Here you have to act first. You have to see whatever is in front of you, and whatever applies to it by gut instinct, by your intuition, you act accordingly. And then you sense whether what you did worked in your favor or not. And that is how you respond. Once you've made sense of it is when it stops being chaotic, because you start seeing a certain pattern to it. And once you have that pattern in place, it becomes a little bit complex, but it's not entirely chaotic, because you now start to predict which way it might turn. Once you have it, it always goes from large to simple. So chaotic is the most devastating of problems. Simple obviously is the easiest. It always flows in the reverse order. So you have to start with chaotic and move towards making it simpler at every single stage. Now, agile and scrum methodologies are used to manage complexity in projects. So this is one example of what particular framework helps you cross this particular kind of hurdle. Stacy's matrix talks about decision strategies which are differentiated based on either degree of certainty or degree of agreement. So which means when you've got higher probability, your likelihood of getting a certain result is increased. Whereas if you've got a degree of agreement, then it is about more people with their expert opinions agreeing upon a certain decided path of action. So it has strength in shared experience. Now, there are situational categories for this. Again, simplicity, complicatedness, complexity, and anarchy. Anarchy obviously being chaos. And it emphasizes how in typical scenarios, you may actually create tailored decision-making strategies depending on the system type you are actually grappling with. There are situation-specific approaches where management strategies must adapt to system types and contrast their traditional thinking and generalized methods towards new and more emergent technologies and processes. So you can keep doing progress in research where you advance into the problem and understand the complexities and apply it across disciplines. So it may have certain requirement from product thinking, product and design. It may have applications in supply chain management. It may have financial implications, and it also may have marketing and communications applications while you're going through the various steps of the problem. So here again, you may have remained gaps where if you don't integrate, there will be a lack of general complexity theory, and therefore you need to interdisciplinarily add the knowledge from all and various other sectors who you can bring in and share notes with. Where your difficulties increase in creating a unified framework, you will have to try and work how we talked about in this particular scenario. If you're in a complex scenario which is chaotic and going borderline there, you have to start building it back with certain acts and measure how your reactions to a particular scenario help you solve it better. And each time you fail, you drop that particular scenario, make a log of it, tell your team that this is not working, you move on to the next possible scenario. This helps you get that simplified understanding sooner, and which is why agile scrum systems work very well in your favor. So at the end of the day, complexity, uncertainty and volatility and ambiguity, all of these things together create a nasty little surprise moment for you. And that surprise moment is what managers have to be mentally prepared to face. The moment you are dropping your weapons when it comes to that particular scenario and are not taking it on is when it gets the better of you. So you have to map the jarring nature of Vuca events in management considerations, and there is a certain Indic perspective here which I am trying to capture here for your benefit. We already have a certain way inside of our thinking and our philosophy which we have encoded to understand how certain scenarios which jar you at the onset can be tackled. So again, when you take Vuca, the main core is that surprises are the norm. This is what hits you in the face. So the key idea here is that unlike machines which are used to doing things in a certain specific formatted way, surprises in human systems are inevitable, and that is something we have to first and foremost mentally be accepting about. You know of the very famous adage that if you want to make God laugh, all you have to do is tell him your plans. So this is typically what also works in the case of a Vuca scenario. There is a school of thought called the Madhyamik school of thought, and this was taught by Nagarjuna in 150 to 200 AD, and he emphasized the interdependence or pratitya samutpad of various scenarios which work together and have interdependencies, and so each must be therefore inspected for its individual capabilities and how they maximally affect the other scenarios. They may have certain legs in the neighboring sister scenarios as well. So there is no element which exists in isolation. That is the insight which comes of it. Everything is definitely interconnected. So because everything is interconnected, you can apply it to your current today scenario. The companies, like all systems, they will also depend on customers, one factor, employees another factor, competitors another factor. You may add more factors which you can identify. You can have market forces, you can have internal stakeholders, you may have external stakeholders. So a variety of things can actually affect the entire scenario, and the better you are informed about these scenarios, the more capable you'll find yourself in order to handle certain scenarios coming out of it. And this interdependence showcases that everything is interconnected and impacts the other factors. And so therefore, interdependence itself may exist independently, which is an overarching factor, but you must recognize that interdependence is the norm. It is there, it is bound to take place. With that, your reality as you perceive is based on human assigned meanings. So you need to take that human bias out of it, and therefore your true reality is something which is beyond our human made constructs. So we have to strive to whatever frameworks, whatever models we create, we have to strive and improve those particular models. Humans are not capable of perceiving only fragments of connections. We need to see the entire connection at one point in time to make sense of it. So therefore, whatever reality we are in, at times it becomes incomplete and it leads to not fully created constructs. This is where knowledge comes in. This is where risk, whatever we don't know, is something we have to minimize by adding more information pieces. So our approach and our attitude towards problem solving becomes very, very important. So constant effort is required and you have to refine your understanding despite the gaps. Gaps will always be there, but it should not put you off that I can't solve this because, oh, I don't know about it. You have to look at finding more information and getting into experimentative stages, add more experts, get more experienced people to contribute on it, and solve it with probably its smaller parts broken down for better understanding. Volatility again has rapid, unpredictable changes in market trends or consumer behavior. So, the impact on market research, which we have discussed very recently, is it requires real-time data collection. Today, we are in much better stage than the years before because online and digital data collection helps us in this particular angle. When on social media, we use social listening, sentiment analysis and tools which are on these lines so that we get critical and shortened product lifestyle analysis for agility of changing certain things. We can change the pricing, we can change packaging, we can change the distribution format, we can add more things to ease consumers' grouses, etc. And uncertainty also, we find that there is lack of clarity about current conditions and future outcomes. So here again with algorithms and analytics, we can use predictive analytics to actually showcase scenarios, so simulations basically. And then with that scenario planning, we can plan multiple market pathways and we can actually choose or even choose a mix of whatever steps we'll take to solve our marketing problems. In terms of complexity, again advanced data modeling comes to our aid today, and this is big data analysis which has AI driven insights. Now you can look at that particular thing in a dashboard format and come up with your understanding and interpretation of the same. Here again, cross disciplinary approaches including sociology, psychology and economics help us understanding it in much more detail. And when it comes to ambiguity, you don't know what is inside of it. So here qualitative research really comes to our aid. Here your in-depth interviews, your ethnography, design thinking and co-creation workshops helps you integrate and form collaborations with your stakeholders as your customer might be, and you address those ambiguous consumer needs. While you are taking them on board, you also look at what they are changing in the system so that you understand how to address the needs better. And you need to remember, surprise will always be a constant, and the entire world is interconnected. So this is a given for your current scenario. So don't get frustrated with increased number of surprises coming your way. The key tools here are to be adaptive, to quickly make mistakes and quickly learn from those mistakes, whether they worked for you, whether you can improve certain things or you want to discard it altogether. And technology is your friend. You have to keep technology on your side. Use it for the heavy lifting and for the detailing of the analysis parts. And always keep in the corner of your eye that you are part of the global business environment. So global perspectives are extremely important. All of these things together will give you the Vuca understanding, and you will have to remember that systems science, cybernetics and behavioral studies are coming up, and organizations will be able to better comprehend interdependencies because of these things in the future. A lot of practical tools exist. You can study these in detail and see what works in your favor. And that the world is interconnected and rapidly changing is a given. A proactive mindset remains the key to sustaining your relevance in that particular market and help you continuously grow as a business. So next time around, what we'll discuss is how measuring market response is going to be played out in today's scenario. And until that time, thank you for being a lovely audience. That's all for today.